Hi, my name is Lawrence Price, and today I'd like to talk to you about a little bit about change management. So, organizational change management specifically is something that a lot of organizations spend time and energy investing in order to make sure that there is buy-in and support for whatever improvements that they're trying to do within the organization in order to make the organization more effective. A lot of times it just makes sense, right? That if we're going to invest in a new piece of software or a new organizational structure or something, right, from a leadership perspective to make the organization perform more effectively, you would think that by and large that people would buy into it and make sure that it sticks around. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. So there's two components into why organizational change management gets really, really tricky. And what I'd like to do is just kind of walk you through those. So I'm going to share my screen here a bit and just bring up a couple of visuals that kind of help out with describing this phenomenon. So give me just a moment and I'll switch over. So what you're seeing on the screen right here is a diagram that a lot of us are familiar with as the law of diffusion. And so what you have here is that on the left-hand side of this normal distribution, you see two groups. You have your innovators and you have your early adopters, about 16% of any organization. So the law of diffusion is used to talk about organizations, which is the context I'm speaking about it in, but people also kind of use it as far as being able to kind of think through a market dynamics when they're offering a new product or service. So innovators and early adopters, if you're thinking of like an iPhone that's coming out and newly on the market, these are the folks that are usually waiting in line the night before, or they've gone ahead and they've bought ahead before the product is even released. These are people that are really open to taking on and being the first people to use a new product or new service, really the first ones that want to dive into a new change that the organization is pushing for. And they're not necessarily people that need a lot of proof or evidence that the new solution is going to be effective or it's going to work. What the law of diffusion says that you have to get this group, the 16%, to be bought in before you really have the opportunity to make the change effective inside the organization. If you're able to do that and get those early adopters to buy in, you cross what they call the chasm. Your next goal, of course, is this early majority. It's about 34% of the organization. So if you get this group plus the early adopters and innovators, you got about half of the organization. The early majority are people that are open to changing, but they need evidence or proof that it's actually going to work. So typically, a good change agent will use the feedback that they receive from the early adopters and innovators and turn those people into agents, change agents or ambassadors and evangelists about what the work has done in order to influence this early majority. If you're able to get the early majority, you're able to get the late majority, the majority of the organization. And there's always going to be this percentage of the organization that's going to be the last ones to get on board, the laggards inside the organization. So sticking with the iPhone analogy, there's always going to be those individuals that are still sticking with their BlackBerries or something along those lines. But that's kind of what, from a group level perspective, that's one of the challenges that you have with change management, is that you've got different pockets within the organization that are an early adopter, innovators. Others are going to be laggards. Others are going to be that early or late majority. A good change agent is really trying to, every time that they interact with an individual or especially a key stakeholder, they're thinking, which of these buckets is this individual in? Is this someone that is really going to jump on board right off the bat without necessarily coming up with a lot of evidence? Or is it someone that I need to maybe engage later on in the progress and show them the data, show them the feedback, perhaps do a pilot in order to produce that data, that proof, that evidence? So that's one theory. The other concept, the second concept I want to bring up, is what's known as the change curve. And I'm just going to minimize the visual a little bit here, zoom out a little bit so we can see the entire visual on the screen. So the change curve here is basically your 4-box. I always joke around that you could prove anything in a 4-box or describe anything in a 4-box. But this 4-box has two axes. One here, you have productivity and morale, and you also have time. So going from this upper left-hand corner where productivity and morale is high, but you're early in the process, most people start off in the denial quadrant, where a new change is is being approached to them or being given to them, and this is at an individual level, their first thing is to deny it, right? That I can't believe that this is going to happen. I don't buy it. The example I always use is whenever I pull into our home and I'm ready to pull into the driveway, I typically park on the right-hand side of the driveway or in the garage. Every once in a while, my wife parks on that side, and I have that moment in the car where I'm in the denial phase. The second step, of course, is that you go into the resistance phase. And so every individual goes through the change curve. We started in denying, we would go into resistance. This is where morale and productivity begin to drop. Next, if you're going to be successful, given some time, people start moving from resistance to exploration, where they start looking for ways to make this work. So going back to me in the driveway, now I'm open to the idea of maybe parking on the other side. And then finally, if we're going to be successful, we get to a place of commitment where the person is willing actually to engage in the change and be a participant of it. This theory, this concept says that every individual, regardless of who we are, regardless of what the change is, we all go through these 4 phases, so these 4 steps: denial, resistance, exploration, and finally commitment, if we're going to be successful in executing a change. The trick with change management is helping individuals, 1, to successfully get through the change curve, and then 2, get through it as quickly as possible without it going very deep in this whole resistance space. So those are the 2 concepts. You have the law of diffusion, which talks about at a group level all the different things, that all the different types of people. And then you have the change curve, which is talking more at an individual level. Hey, these are the 4 phases that people are experience change. Now you put those things together inside of an organization and you begin to get something that looks like this. And I'm going to zoom in on this particular visual so we can talk about it a little bit more depth. So in this visual here, we have an organization, and we're going to talk about it from 2 perspectives. One is on the horizontal axis here, we're talking about time, and then of course, time and resources that are needed to make the change happen. And then here on the vertical axis, we're talking about the number of employees committed to making the change occur. And so you have the 2 visuals that we talked about. You have the change of the law of diffusion here in that distribution, and then you also have the change curve. And then you have different leaders. So usually we engage our most senior people in the organization, our senior managers or the executive leadership team. And and within that group, you have early adopters, you have early majorities, late majorities, and laggards. And then you also have each of those individuals going through the 4 phases of the change curve: denial, resistance, exploration, and finally commitment. At the next level of leadership, let's say they're direct reports, so those business unit leadership teams, you have the same thing. You have groups of people that are in different phases or different phases according to the law of diffusion. And then you also have everyone going through the change curve. Then eventually you get to middle management, same thing. Frontline leaders, same thing. And then finally, individual contributors, so people actually doing the work inside the organization. And the challenge with organizational change is not only do you have these 2 concepts happening, but you have them happening at the same time at different places within the organization, and they're taking they happen in different places. So for example, let's say you're working with a senior manager team, those executives, and that's where you begin your change activities. Well, by the time that you've gotten that group or the majority of that group to a place where they're committed, they're ready to execute. You're just now starting your communications with your business unit leadership teams, and they're probably in denial and resistance. So you may have some executives that are saying, why aren't you done already? Well, it's because you've got their direct reports. They're still early in the change curve and that you're still working with. And then by the time you get those teams moving to a place where they're ready to commit, you're now doing the same thing in middle management. And oh, by the way, you haven't even talked to frontline leaders yet or individual contributors. So as a change agent within the side of an organization like this, you have to be thinking, 1, I've got these 2 concepts at work, but also at the same time, I have these 2 concepts at work with different levels of the organization, where groups of individuals and individuals themselves are in different phases or different places as far as being able to accept the change. This is just this is just at a high level, 2 theories or 2 concepts that work within inside of an organization that makes change difficult. So it's important I think as a change agent or as a leader, as a project manager, to have these things in mind and think about what things that you're actually going to do in order to move the needle, get buy-in, and move across the organization as quickly and as efficiently as possible to make sure that people are bought in and supportive of the change that's going to happen. Because without good change management, the organization typically snaps back to the previous state in some way or another, and they resist the new idea that was introduced. I hope this helps in explaining why change management and support is important. Please feel free to reach out to me in the comment section if you have any questions. Don't forget to like the video and definitely subscribe to us. I appreciate it and have a wonderful day.